Well, Tuesday, the 21st of February, will mark International Mother Language Day under the theme Multilingual Education, a necessity to transform education. Celebrated annually, the day focuses on how languages and multilingualism can foster inclusion and permit coexistence in communities. Well, for more on this, we speak to Sociolinguist and Linguistic Anthropologist from the Tshwane University of Technology, Professor Thabo Ditsele. Prof, thank you so much for your time and thank you for joining us on our platform this morning. So often, Prof, when we talk about mother languages and education in one's mother language and multilingualism in education, the focus is on children. But what's the importance of one speaking in their mother language, across the board? When we talk about social inclusion, when we talk about connectivity, it has a role to play, doesn't it?
Yes, thank you very much for having me, Ntokozo, and thank you to your viewers. Yes, language plays a very, very important role in our lives. It's not just a tool of communication, it's also a tool to transfer knowledge. Now, if you communicate with someone in a language that they understand best, they are probably going to grasp that which you are communicating to them, as opposed to doing it in a language that they may not understand the best. So it's very, very important that we look at a day like International Mother Language Day as a day that should touch on our conscience when it comes to how we could develop our languages further, so that at some point, perhaps in our lifetime, they are able to serve as tools for transference of knowledge.
I want to talk about the challenges in doing just that, in utilizing our mother language more often. We know that there is a proliferation of, Western languages, so to speak, or languages that have a Western sort of origins. And in that proliferation, a lot of the mother tongue, a lot of the ethnic languages are lost. What are the other challenges that we're facing when it comes to seeing more of a saturation of that?
The biggest problem is a model. We do not have a model. I mean, every year, on the 21st of February and every September, our Heritage Month, we keep saying the same thing. And that same thing is we need to. I don't think there is an issue right now about the necessity to develop, indigenous languages for intellectualization, to teach through them, even up to higher education. The problem really in South Africa is we do not have a model. And this is something that I always say when I'm in a platform like this one and wherever else where I am. I would say we don't seem to realize that multilingualism doesn't come cheap. Multilingualism requires a lot of thinking. So, for instance, let's take a typical school, let's say in Sociolinguist or in Soweto or in Ekurhuleni, where there wouldn't be a majority of learners in a class who speak, let's say, language A. So it's 20% there, it's 5% there, it's 10% there. So we don't have a model. We don't have a model that will say, this is how we should do it. What we tend to do is to use countries that do not fit our model. For instance, people will tell you children in Germany are taught in German. What people do not tell you is that Germany has pursued a monolingual approach where it doesn't matter whether German is your home language or not. You have to study in German if you are in Germany. The same with Spain, the same with France. But in South Africa, we have 11, soon to be 12 official languages. So we have to sit down. We have to sit down as language planners to say, this is the model that a school in Soweto, a school in Ekurhuleni, a school in Sociolinguist should pursue. Otherwise, for the next 30 years, we'll still be saying we need to do this project, but without an implementation plan, it will never take off the ground.
With 40%, Prof, of the global population having this very struggling to access education in their mother tongue, it does seem that, and some of those countries, they're linguistic. When we look at our own and we have such a diverse range of languages, it does appear to be a daunting task, the one that you're referring to. Is there a fear, is there a concern that given enough time, with enough time, our children, their children's children will lose use of their mother tongue and in so doing, lessen our ability to foster this multilingualism?
It's very, very correct. I mean, if you look at, what happened elsewhere in the world, if you look at Central America, South America, you can count the number of countries where indigenous languages are spoken to this day. I mean, if you go to a country like Argentina, it's all Spanish. In linguistics generally, it is said that it takes about 150 years or 4 generations for a language to die. So perhaps in you and my lifetime, we will not see the languages that are spoken here dying. We won't see that. But in the next decade, we are going to be in trouble. In 2014, I wrote a paper where I showed that numbers were moving towards English and away from African languages. I'm waiting for the official statistics to see if that trend from 2021 continues to shift. If it continues in that path, it means my great-great-grandchildren will not speak Setswana at all because they would have possibly be speakers of English. So we are headed in a direction that is very, very dangerous, that is very detrimental to our languages.
Yeah. Oh, my goodness. Talking about sort of the other detrimental effects that we're dealing with today, before we cast our eyes too much into the future, Prof, today we have swathes of grade 4 learners. The percentage, I think, at some point was 75. I think now it's increased to about 78, edging closer to that 80 percentile of grade 4 learners who are reading without comprehension. And there's so much conversation around how teaching in the mother tongue at that developmental age can go such a long way to fostering better learning, better development, and to a certain degree solving this impending crisis that's sort of unfolding before our eyes. Our children are learning to read without understanding. And that cannot do well if we want to, say, for instance, bring up a generation of critical thinkers, of future leaders, of visionaries. They need to learn how to read with understanding.
That is correct, Dogozo. Here you have two problems. The first problem is that of teaching, the methodology that we use. There is a field of study in applied linguistics called reading. In fact, should I say, it's a research-focused area. It's one of the areas that we do not put emphasis on. We take it for granted that if you have eyes that you can read, when you read, you'll read for minutes. That's not how it works. You have to understand the process of reading. So I would submit that a lot of teachers really do not understand the process called reading. There's no investment in conscientizing teachers about how to go about the reading process. So if teachers don't understand the process of reading, how will they possibly be successful when they teach learners how to read? The second problem, also, is that of rushing students or learners to English at a very, very early stage. I mean, we come from communities where nobody speaks English natively, but from grade 1, parents insist that their children should be taught in English. So if the teacher doesn't speak English well, nobody in the community speaks English, but then we expect that after only 8 semesters, only 4 years, students should read for meaning. No ways, they will not. Perhaps the third challenge is this. In primary schools, in the past, when I was in school, teachers who taught us would be speakers of our language. Today, you don't have that. If they are looking for a foundation-phase teacher, the Department of Education doesn't really look at whether this person can communicate in a language that learners speak. In my hometown, in my home village in Rustenburg, there are teachers who do not speak Setswana as a home language, and they have to teach learners who in the community speak Setswana. You see, so the results are not a surprise. It's a combination of the factors that I have presented to you.
Right. So we clearly have a broken system. You mentioned earlier the need for a concerted effort using a model to properly introduce multilingualism into our education system. But what's the balance, if there is a balance, Prof, that needs to be struck here? Because if we're honest with ourselves, when you're applying to go to university or applying for a job or trying to enter the job market or any other sort of upward moving market, the requirement is that you be fluent in a particular language, that language being English. They require proficiency in that language and not your home language. So the narrative, the conditioning that a lot of parents and subsequently their children have is that I have to be proficient in this particular language for me to have any kind of upward mobility in life. How do we counter that narrative?
It starts, there is a retired professor from the University of Pretoria called Vic Webb. He's been a proponent of a model called bottom-up approach. What do I mean by that? I mean, if communities on the ground demand that their languages be used, wherever they go, whether it's at banks, whether it's at Department of Transport, the clinics, the powers that be will see the necessity, the need to empower, African languages. But if we just sit on our laurels and do not demand, what is going to happen is the position of English will not be threatened. Now, people follow a language that pays bills. Whether it's your language, whether it's not your language. So English is spoken by 10% of the population as a first language, as a home language. However, what we tend to see is that we rush to English because it is through this language that bills could be paid. So the message really that should be sent to parents is, if in your little space you do not demand the use of this language, the use of your home language, it will not grow. People expect what Professor Vic Webb calls top-down approach. They expect government to do something about it. They don't really realize that if you demand something, government will respond. Whereas if government, if the approach is bottom-down, it's kind of like imposed on you. So models that work are the ones that are initiated from the ground upwards, as opposed to from the town to bottom. So speakers of African language should realize that for as long as they do not demand in their small spaces that their languages be used, the status quo, unfortunately, will remain.
Prof, thank you so much for coming onto the show this morning and sharing your insights with us. That was Associate Professor of Sociolinguistics and Linguistic Anthropology at the Tshwane University of Technology, Professor Thabo Ditsele.